Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
I heard a program the other day. It was Bill McLaughlin about Respighi. Respighi was the Technicolor composer to me.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great description of him.
He knew orchestral color like unlike anything. He knew how to write things that really appealed to people. You may not get a particularly emotional high from it other than the joy of hearing some really wonderful orchestral sounds, which to me in itself is worthy of joy. But I thought it was really interesting because other than the three main tone poems, we don't hear a lot about the guy.
It's true that that's a fantastic description of him. I always called him sort of the Korsakov of Italy.
Of course, he was trained by Korsakov.
Yeah, he just had this incredible affection, and he had sort of a savant kind of way to orchestrate. And yeah, his three tone poems are absolutely phenomenal. And actually, of all the recordings that I was ever involved in with the Pittsburgh Symphony, that was probably my favorite recording that we ever made. The three pieces by Respighi. They're just spectacular. We had an incredible brass section and
Yeah, right.
energy from Mazel, incredible string playing. I'm very proud of that recording of our orchestra at the time.
I just thought it was kind of interesting because it would be nice to explore more of his music,
Yeah,
which
yeah. I've conducted a few of his things, the birds and a couple of other things, and
there's ancient airs and
ancient
dances,
airs and dances, of course. Yeah,
which
and
has that kind of retro, baroqueish
right,
feel to it.
right. And I played his sonata, which is very, very difficult, very hard, but
Huh.
beautiful.
We were talking about composers who you think overappreciate. I don't like the term overrated because nobody's actually doing a rating, but some people are overappreciated. It's like I mentioned to you, Renoir. I think people really like, but if you ask people who know art, they'll say, "Yeah, schlock, not that good." Thomas Kincaid, the painter of light. Oh, beautiful stuff, but it's schlock. So it kind of got me thinking there must be classical composers who are the same way. And so you have a thought on that?
Well, I've always had a feeling about Benjamin Britten. I always felt he was a composer that didn't appeal to me in many ways on many different levels. Being a musician, my job is to try to find the value and bring out the best of each composer. Whether or not you understand their music or you like their music, but you try your best to bring it to life. But in the case of Britten, I just couldn't find something in there that I could gravitate to or that was grounded. I felt everything was sort of lighthearted, not really sincere. When you play music by Puccini or you play music by Brahms or you play music by Beethoven, you find a certain depth of commitment to humanity, or in the case of Brahms, this connection of divinity that he talked about, that if he didn't have the power of the force of God in his writing, then he didn't feel inspired and the piece was not worthwhile. And he would either burn them or not publish them or whatever. In fact, I got in a bit of an argument with a friend of mine who performs music from the Morgan Library in New York. And there's a manuscript there of a piano quartet, apparently, by Brahms that had never been published. And they decided to perform it. And what I got back from my colleagues was that this was a big disappointment, that the piece is not that good. And that, in a way, I felt tarnished Brahms's just impeccable reputation because obviously he didn't want to have it published. And somehow that one escaped him. He didn't get it in the chimney or something like that. And this piece was brought to light, and it should never have been. Brahms just had such a high standard, had this feeling that if you didn't have that force in you, that divinity, that the hand of God in your writing, you shouldn't put it out there. And that's why he rather disdained most of his contemporaries at the time. And that's what Benjamin Britten, I think, lacks. I think his music it just lacks that kind of depth. It lacks that spiritual connection, the human condition. I just don't hear it. I don't feel it. I've analyzed it. I've played it, and I just can't seem to find it.
And yet he's held in high regard, as we were saying. You can hold somebody in high regard and they still could be not that good.
There's no question. And, Britten has played quite a bit, has his operas, and he has his string quartets, his violin concerto, his suites for cello. I've heard or played a bit of that stuff. I really tried, for instance, I heard one of his string quartets. I really tried to like it. I really did. I listened to it a number of times and then went to hear a quartet play it in concert. And I just couldn't gravitate to it. There's a few moments in Peter Grimes that maybe I'd rather like, okay, but overall, as a generalization and as a general output, I just find his music a bit vapid, a bit empty, and it seems rather calculated, but not with tremendous precision. And so I just don't find anything in it moves me. That's the bottom line. It doesn't move me. I listen to two bars of Puccini and I'm a wet mess. And you play anything by Brahms and you feel otherworldly. You just feel like you're transported somewhere different where it's like where other humans don't normally reside. It's that kind of feeling when you hear them. And then you have the power of people like Beethoven. His messages, emotional and symphonic and orchestrations and things like this that are very powerful. And I can think of 100 things of Beethoven that I find very, very moving and very human. But I can't think of hardly anything of Benjamin Britten that does that to me. War Requiem, as I said, also is just I find to be epic. It's sort of like getting a book with 500 pages, and you feel when you read it, there's only 200 pages worth of material in it. It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
large type font or something, and
That's kind of how I feel about Bruckner, but
yeah, a little bit like that too.
it, a composer that I find really interesting is Vaughan Williams. I believe that A Lark Ascending and variations on a theme of Thomas Tallis, particularly the latter, to be some of the finest, most gorgeous, most moving music ever. But if you listen to the rest of his stuff, it's all that English pastoral stuff. And I don't mean to denigrate it, but it just isn't compelling. He reached the peak, it seems to me, with those two pieces, but so much of his music is just mediocre.
I mean, the Antarctica Symphony feels like a trip there while you're listening to it, with like a long boat cruise all the way there. There's just nothing but tundra. There's not a lot there. And yeah, I played a fair amount of Von Williams. I played I believe it was the Fourth Symphony, which is based on a 12 tone row, which most people don't know that he actually used that in that symphony. And I did play his oratorio Job, which was very pretty, but not a lot of substance, like you said. It's just a lot of it's sort of like those air bubbles in the packing material that you can get. It's a lot of bulk in it and stuff, but there's nothing but a little bit of air and a lot of substance in it.
Yeah. I was interviewing Vasily Petrenko, and he made the comment that English composers aren't particularly well known in the US. He said, yeah, you all know Elgar, but you don't know Vaughan Williams very well. And I think there's probably a reason for that.
And we don't play a lot of Walton.
Right. Although
I've played,
Belshazzar's Feast is pretty,
that's a fantastic piece,
yeah,
but I've also played a symphony by Walton. I don't remember which one it was, and we did it with Sir Geoffrey Tate, and it was a little bit disjunct and a little bit loud and not really, again, compelling to me. I mean, I like the Elgar music much, much more, especially the violin concerto, the cello concerto. Concerto happens to be my favorite concerto of all time. If I had to play one last concerto in my life, it would be the Elgar. I love the cello concerto. I love a lot of his stuff. I love his symphonies too. I think they're beautiful. But I can see why people would not gravitate to this kind of music. It appears a little pompous and it's a little overblown at times. I remember our principal trumpet player, when I played the El Concerto with the Pittsburgh Symphony and Lauren Mazel conducted, he came to me, he said, listen, I just want to tell you, you really play the piece well. He said, but what a snore. I'll come more. But that's how a lot of people view it. And so you're right. I think British music in general is, not as well appreciated and it's not as well presented here in the US. So we're not really that well versed in it. So there's an empty spot there in programming that perhaps we find a pretty good piece by a few British composers that would be worth programming.
Right. I think that's actually true of Russian music also. Aside from four or five composers, we don't hear a lot outside of Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky and Shostakovich and Prokofiev. But there are a lot of Russian composers, even Glazunov. And I realize there are drawbacks to Glazunov's writing, but we never hear that. We never hear Glier, for example. And like anything, there's reasons for it, but we really do focus on that Germanic repertoire,
Absolutely
French too, a
right.
little bit.
And but in reference to Brahms, when Brahms was interviewed by Arthur Abel, he was asked whether any of his contemporaries' music would be played in 50 years. He unapologetically said he won't be playing any of their music, and you'll be playing mine, but not theirs, because of that, what I said earlier about that the hand of God, the divinity that was inherent in Brahms's music. And he named a number of Russian composers, such as Anton Rubinstein, and he mentioned him by name and said, Rubinstein has some nice tunes, but no form. It's not going to last. He said he's popular for a few minutes, and then it'll be over with. He said, I guarantee you won't be playing his music in 50 years. And I think what we're faced with is that if we are constantly looking for the highest standards of composition, then there's a very limited supply of that. We have plenty of good music, we have plenty of okay music, and even plenty of mediocre music. Occasionally, we have some bad music in there occasionally. But in America, I think most people gravitate to that very high standard of composition. And anything below those high standards of composition, whether they know it or not, the reason they like those pieces is that they are everlasting. They have outlasted the lives of the composers and they've lasted well past their lifetimes, 300 years at times. So that's the test of how good they are. And so why do we hear more Glazunov? Really, nowadays, you might hear the violin concerto occasionally. People don't even know he wrote a saxophone concerto, which is actually a beautiful piece. I've actually played a couple of symphonies by Glazunov, but I did them when I was a kid, when I was in high school, in my youth orchestra. And they were beautiful. I remember they were just absolutely beautiful, but they don't stand the test of time. And people want to hear the very best music written, and there's not a lot of room for anything but the best. It has value and it has its place in programming, but I get it. Once you've driven a Rolls Royce, you're less reluctant to drive it after that. So
Right,
not against Toyota, but
right,
that's just the way people view it.
right. Good point. Gene Pritzker, always a composer from New York, he said something to the effect that we'll only know what good music is being produced today 200 years from now, because it
Right.
has to also go through that test of time.
You
And
know, Oddly enough, Hindemith was asked, why is it that you have so many good pieces and so many not very good pieces? And he said, you wouldn't know that my good pieces were as good as they are if I hadn't written the less good pieces. And I thought that was an interesting defense,
sure,
as if the maturation process and the experience process is what allowed for these really fine works to come out of him. And he had to write, kind of a number of mediocre works for Matisse de Mahler to be created, or camera music or something like that. I think he has some fantastic pieces that also are not played very much. But he's sort of on the seesaw. He has some good pieces and not very good pieces,
Right.
and it kind of goes back and forth. But when you take Brahms, he has nothing but great pieces,
Right.
nothing but. Every piece he ever wrote that I've ever heard, or that any of my colleagues have conducted, played, or listened to, there's never been a negative comment about it. They all feel the greatness of this music. And
And Hindemith was one of those composers that was much more played 50, 60 years ago. Maybe
yes,
because it was fresh. You hardly ever hear it now. Hardly ever.
it's funny, when I conducted the Pittsburgh Symphony on my official conducting date, I chose as the first work music for brass and strings, and by Hindemith. And people looked at me like, never heard of the piece. And we went into the archives, and the last time it had been done was in 1962 with William Steinberg. So it had been like 40 years, basically,
Yeah.
since it had been done.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, the Barber First Symphony also had been neglected. It had not been in the repertoire. I conducted it, and it had not been in the repertoire since 1963 or something.
Right.
So even Barber had a long lull. Now he's back pretty much a standard nowadays. But
Yeah. Well, think
yeah,
of William Schumann, who was
yeah,
so big in the 50s and 60s. He was head of the Lincoln Center and so on. We never hear his music today. But
yeah.
every
It's too
time
bad.
he was going to premiere a new symphony, it was big news back then, but not now.
Yeah, I played one of his symphonies on tour with Lauren Mizell. It was fantastic,
Yeah.
fantastic. I was thinking about a comment that you had made about Tchaikovsky, and about how he changes keys, and how he just kind of knows how to keep your interest, and kind of almost cheapen a transition. And you had me thinking about it, and I kept thinking, yeah, he's sort of the Barry Manilow of classical music. He'll
Mhm.
take a theme and move it up a half a step, just like Barry Manilow would be in a pop song.
Exactly.
I thought that's what the popularity of his music is about, actually. It's sort of this kind of simple, accessible, and agreeable way of making the music, but not challenging you. See,
Right.
the really great pieces challenge you. They challenge you to
Right.
listen, to feel, to have a reaction. And with Tchaikovsky, he said, "Here's what you will feel. I'll make you
Yeah.
feel a little happier, a half step higher."
Yeah. And you won't have to think about it at all. It'll
That's
hit
right.
you right in the face.
It's the same theme.
Exactly. All right. Hey, man, I appreciate your willingness to come back.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And William, you're a pleasure to speak with, and you're a great friend. And good luck with this whole project.
I appreciate it. Hey, you
All
take
right.
care. Enjoyed
Okay.
it.
All right. Take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye.